the week everything burned down. My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I was 38 years old when I realized the people who raised me had never truly loved me. Not in the way I had spent my entire life believing. I learned it standing beneath a gray October sky, staring at two polished mahogany coffins resting side by side. One belonged to my husband. The other belonged to my 8-year-old daughter. The wind cut through my black coat as fallen leaves scraped across the cemetery path. People always imagine grief as screaming, breaking things, collapsing onto the floor. But grief isn't usually loud. Most days, it's forgetting for half a second that they're gone. It's reaching for the person beside you in bed, only to touch cold sheets. It's pouring 2 cups of coffee before remembering there's no one left to drink the second one. It's hearing laughter in another room, before silence reminds you that your house has become a museum. I stood between those 2 coffins, trying to remember how breathing worked. My husband, Ethan Hayes, had been 39. He taught 7th grade science. He could explain black holes to 12-year-olds using marshmallows and paper plates. He believed every problem had a solution if you stayed calm long enough to find it. Our daughter, Sophie, 8 years old, missing front teeth, obsessed with astronomy. She wanted to become the first woman to build hotels on Mars. She corrected adults when they confused meteors with meteorites. She painted stars on everything she owned, even her rain boots, especially her rain boots. The funeral director touched my elbow gently. "It's time." I nodded. I don't remember walking. I remember people crying. Neighbors, teachers, parents from Sophie's soccer team, students Ethan had taught 10 years earlier, a waitress from our favorite breakfast diner, the mailman, the crossing guard from Sophie's school. Almost the entire church had filled with people who loved them. But the front row, the one reserved for family, was empty. No mother, no father, no younger sister, no brother-in-law, no nieces, no nephews, no one. The polished wooden pew remained untouched from beginning to end. And somehow, that hurt almost as much as the funerals themselves. Because even then, some stupid part of me kept expecting the doors to open. I kept imagining my mother rushing in late, hair messy, face red from crying, apologizing, saying there'd been traffic, a delayed flight, something, anything. But the doors never opened. Because while I buried my husband and daughter, my family was somewhere in the Caribbean, posting vacation photos, smiling beside turquoise water, holding tropical drinks, celebrating. I didn't know then that 5 days later, they would call me asking for $50,000. And what happened after that would destroy whatever remained between us forever. 3 months earlier, my life had been ordinary, beautifully ordinary. I owned a small bookstore called Moonlight Pages in Cedar Ridge, Colorado. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't wildly successful. But it was mine. Ethan used to joke that I had created the world's least profitable addiction. I sold books, hosted children's story hours, ran writing clubs, recommended mystery novels to retirees. And every afternoon at exactly 3:45, Sophie would burst through the front door wearing her backpack crooked over one shoulder. Dad says Pluto still counts as a planet if enough people believe hard enough. He said that just to annoy astronomers. I know. Then she'd grin. Because Ethan loved making her laugh. Friday nights were pizza nights. Saturday mornings meant pancakes shaped like constellations. Sunday evenings were movie marathons under blanket forts. Ordinary. Predictable. Perfect. Until the accident. Even now, I can't describe every detail. Some memories deserve privacy, especially when children are involved. What matters is this. There had been a school field trip, a charter bus, a mountain road slick with early snowfall, a driver who lost control. By the time I arrived at the hospital, everything I loved had already slipped beyond my reach. I remember doctors talking. Someone offered water. Someone touched my shoulder. People kept asking if there was anyone they could call. I gave them my mother's number first, because that's what daughters do. No matter how old they become, no matter how independent they pretend to be. When life falls apart, you call your mother. She answered on the fourth ring. Rebecca, we're boarding soon. I couldn't speak at first. My throat closed. Mom. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Ethan and Sophie. Silence. Then, what happened? I told her. The words sounded unreal, like someone else's tragedy. They're gone. The silence stretched. Finally. Oh, Rebecca. Relief flooded me. She understood. She would come. Of course she would come. Then she sighed. When is the funeral? I blinked. What? When are you planning it? I stared at the hospital wall. The funeral. Your father and I leave for our cruise tomorrow morning. I thought I'd misheard. A cruise. The Mediterranean one. We booked it last winter. I waited. Surely she wasn't serious. I know this is awful, she continued carefully, but these tickets were expensive. The room tilted. Mom, could the services wait until we're back? I don't remember hanging up. I only remember staring at my phone. Thinking. My husband and daughter just died. And my mother was worried about cruise tickets. The next message came from my younger sister. Vanessa. Family group chat. We all feel terrible, Becca, but the kids have been looking forward to this trip for months. Then another. Surely you understand. Then one more. The message I read 4 times because my brain refused to process it. I don't think everyone should cancel a once-in-a-lifetime vacation over something they can't change. Something. They called my husband and daughter's funeral. Something. I looked around the hospital waiting room. At strangers bringing coffee to grieving families. At nurses holding hands. At people showing more compassion than my own blood. And for the first time in my life, I stopped making excuses for them. I stopped telling myself they didn't mean it. That they expressed love differently. That family was complicated. No. Family wasn't complicated. Love wasn't complicated. You show up. Or you don't. And my family didn't. I buried Ethan and Sophie that Saturday. Without them, the front pew stayed empty. The minister stumbled through tears. Sophie's 3rd-grade teacher cried so hard she had to step outside. Ethan's students filled an entire section of the church. Afterward, people hugged me, brought casseroles, shared stories, held my hands. Uncle Frank drove 6 hours just to sit beside me in silence. At the cemetery, he squeezed my shoulder. You know this changes things. I stared at the fresh earth. What does? You stop chasing people who won't choose you. I didn't answer, because I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. As the last guests drifted away, my phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. I looked down. Mom calling. I almost didn't answer. Eventually, I did. And the first thing she said wasn't, "How are you?" It wasn't, "I'm sorry." It wasn't even, "I love you." Instead, over the sound of ocean waves and distant laughter, my mother asked, Rebecca, do you still have access to your savings? I closed my eyes. What savings? The $50,000. I opened them again. What $50,000? There was a pause. Then she said quietly, Vanessa and Daniel need help. And in that moment, 5 days after burying my husband and daughter, standing alone inside a house that no longer sounded like home, I realized the worst part of my story hadn't happened yet. The price of being family. I didn't answer my mother's question right away. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the refrigerator. There was still a drawing hanging on it. Sophie's latest masterpiece. A purple rocket ship with crooked windows. Underneath it, she'd written, "To Mars and back." My mother cleared her throat. Rebecca, what $50,000? The irritation in her voice arrived immediately. The money we gave you. I frowned. What money? The money for the bookstore. I leaned against the counter. 5 years earlier, when I'd purchased Moonlight Pages from its retiring owner, I'd been short on the down payment. My parents had stepped in. $50,000. I remembered exactly how it happened. Christmas Eve. My father's study. Vanessa sitting nearby with Daniel. My mother smiling proudly. We believe in you, she'd said. We want to help you build your future. They'd called it a gift. Repeatedly. A gift. Not a loan. Not an investment. A gift. At the time, I'd cried. Because I'd believed it meant they finally saw me. That they were proud. Now, 5 days after burying my family, they wanted it back. They need it, my mother said. Who? Vanessa and Daniel. I laughed. The sound shocked even me. Not because it was funny. Because grief had pushed me somewhere beyond tears. Need it for what? Another pause. Then, Daniel's restaurant. Of course. Daniel's restaurant. My brother-in-law, Daniel Price, had always dreamed big. He opened restaurants the same way some people bought lottery tickets. With optimism. And other people's money. 3 years earlier, he'd opened an upscale steakhouse called the Copper Room. Exposed brick. Leather booths. Craft cocktails. Expensive menu. For 6 months, Vanessa flooded social media with photographs. Date night at our place. Living the dream. Hard work pays off. Then inflation hit. Customers disappeared. Debt piled up. The dream cracked. Now, apparently, I was expected to save it. You cannot be serious, I whispered. They're family. So were Ethan and Sophie. Silence. We can't change what happened to them. I closed my eyes. But we can save Daniel's business. She actually said it. As though my husband and daughter existed on one side of a scale. And restaurant profits existed on the other. You buried your family, she continued softly. Vanessa still has hers. I couldn't breathe. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Looked at Sophie's drawing. Then brought it back. You skipped their funeral. We had commitments. You skipped their funeral. Rebecca. You posted beach photos. We didn't know what else to do. You called my daughter's funeral something. My mother's voice hardened. You need to stop dwelling on tragedy. I almost dropped the phone. Stop dwelling. Life goes on. I stared into the silence of my kitchen. The clock ticked. The heater hummed. And suddenly, I understood. My grief made them uncomfortable. My pain interrupted their plans. Their vacations. Their image of themselves as good people. So they minimized it. Repackaged it. Reduced it. Until asking $50,000 from a grieving widow sounded reasonable. Rebecca. What? We're counting on you. Then she said the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. You don't have Ethan and Sophie to provide for anymore. Everything inside me went still. Not shattered. Not exploded. Still. As if my entire body realized anger wouldn't help. Only clarity would. You think their deaths freed up money. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Rebecca, you think my husband and daughter became available funds. Her breathing grew uneven. Don't twist my words. But she had already said them. And once spoken, truth rarely crawls back into hiding. Vanessa called the next morning. No condolences. No apology. Straight to business. Mom said you're upset. I nearly admired the audacity. Upset? You know what I mean. Explain it to me. She sighed dramatically. Daniel's investors are pulling out. And we'll lose everything. I waited. Our house. I waited longer. The kids. What about them? They'll suffer. I looked toward Sophie's empty bedroom. You know who else is suffering? Vanessa ignored it. You have savings. I had a family. That's unfair. I laughed again. You want to talk about unfair? Rebecca, you went snorkeling while I picked out my daughter's casket. Silence. Then, we can't undo that. No. But you can help us. The entitlement in her voice stunned me. Not because she'd asked. Because she'd assumed. As though saying yes wasn't optional. As though my purpose had always been rescuing everyone else. You owe us. There it was. The truth. You owe us because Mom and Dad helped you. They gave me a gift. No. It was absolutely a gift. It was family money. I rubbed my forehead. What does that even mean? It means sometimes family sacrifices for each other. I looked at Sophie's drawing again. The crooked rocket ship. The purple stars. You sacrificed my funeral. What? My husband and daughter's funeral. Rebecca, don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I buried my child. And somehow, I was dramatic. After we hung up, I wandered through the bookstore. Moonlight Pages opened late those days. My employees had practically forced me to take time. Still, I couldn't sit at home. The silence there swallowed me whole. Mrs. Donnelly from the cafe next door arrived carrying coffee. She'd done it every morning since the accident. No speeches. No advice. Just coffee. You eat anything. A muffin. Actual food. I'm trying. She nodded. Then sat beside me behind the register. You look angry. I think I finally am. Good. I blinked. What? She shrugged. Sad gets all the attention. But anger. Anger reminds you something mattered. Tears burned unexpectedly. I don't know what to do. About which part? My family. Mrs. Donnelly stirred sugar into her coffee. The people who love you show up. I stared. The rest are just relatives. Simple. Brutal. True. 3 days later. Daniel called. I almost ignored it. Almost. Rebecca. Daniel. I need to be honest. That'll be new. He sighed. The restaurant owes more than we thought. How much? 90,000. 90. We only need 50 from you. Only. I pressed my fingers against my eyes. Why me? You have assets. You mean the bookstore. You could refinance. I lowered my hand. You want me to mortgage my future. For family. I laughed softly. No. His voice sharpened. Rebecca, no, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're being selfish. Selfish. I repeated the word silently. The woman who buried her husband and daughter alone was selfish. The people sipping cocktails during the funeral were victims. I almost admired their creativity. You know what? Daniel snapped. What? If Ethan were alive, he'd help. The room spun. My voice dropped. You don't get to use my husband. Silence. Then, you've changed. I looked around Moonlight Pages. At Sophie's favorite reading corner. At Ethan's handwritten notes tucked into old books. At memories built from kindness. Yeah, I whispered. I think I have. That evening, I went home, opened the closet, reached for the small metal lockbox on the highest shelf. Inside were important papers, insurance documents, birth certificates, tax records, and an envelope I'd forgotten existed. Across the front, Ethan had written in messy blue ink. Just in case. My hands started shaking. I sat on the living room floor. The same floor where Sophie once built pillow forts. Where Ethan taught her chess. Where ordinary happiness used to live. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Inside was something that would change everything. And for the first time since the funerals, I realized my family had made one enormous mistake. They assumed grief had made me weak. They had no idea what Ethan had left behind. The envelope Ethan never told me about. For a long time, I just stared at the envelope in my lap. The blue ink had faded slightly. Just in case. That sounded exactly like Ethan. He believed in backup plans. Extra batteries. Emergency flashlights. Roadside kits. Copies of important documents stored in 3 different places. He used to joke that if aliens invaded Earth, he'd probably have a checklist ready. I almost put the envelope back. Because grief teaches you strange things. One of them is that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. And I wasn't sure I could survive another goodbye. Eventually, I unfolded the papers inside. The first page wasn't dramatic. No secret fortune. No hidden inheritance. Just Ethan's handwriting. Neat. Careful. Familiar enough that my chest tightened immediately. At the top, he'd written, "If you're reading this." Then something unexpected happened. First of all, if this is because I finally lost that argument about whether Pluto counts as a planet, I want the record to show that I was right. I laughed. Then I cried. Because even from paper, he still sounded like himself. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. Becca, if life has taught me anything, it's that people reveal who they are when you're no longer useful to them. I don't think your parents are bad people, but I do think they love conditionally. They love people who fit inside the role they've assigned them. You've spent your whole life earning approval that should have been given freely. If the day ever comes when you have to choose between protecting yourself and keeping peace, choose yourself. Not because you're selfish, because nobody else ever taught you how. You deserve peace too. And if Sophie is reading this someday, sweetheart, Pluto is absolutely still a planet. Fight anyone who disagrees. I covered my mouth. The tears came harder then. Not violent. Not uncontrollable. Just quiet. Like rain against windows. There was another page beneath it. This one wasn't a letter. It was a list. A numbered list. Ethan loved lists. At the top, things we haven't done yet. See the Northern Lights. Visit Ireland. Teach Sophie to drive. Retire near water. Expand Moonlight Pages. Start the Literacy Foundation. Build something that lasts longer than us. I read the final line 3 times. Build something that lasts longer than us. Underneath it, in different handwriting, written later, pressed deeper into the paper, he'd added, "The Sophie Hayes Reading Project. For kids who need books. For kids who need someone to believe in them." I stopped breathing. The Sophie Hayes Reading Project. We talked about it dozens of times. Late at night, after closing the bookstore, Ethan wanted to provide free books to children in underserved communities. Sophie wanted to decorate every box with stars. We'd always said, "Someday, someday." That dangerous word. The word people use when they assume they'll have more time. Beneath the list, I found one final document. This one made my heart race. It was from Ethan's life insurance policy. I knew about the policy. Teachers were encouraged to have them. I simply hadn't been capable of reviewing paperwork since the accident. My eyes scanned the page, then stopped. Coverage amount, $450,000. I sat frozen. I'd forgotten. Forgotten because money had stopped mattering. Because when the people you love die, the number in your bank account feels irrelevant. I looked around the living room. At Sophie's abandoned astronomy books. At Ethan's reading glasses, still resting on the side table. $450,000. And suddenly, my mother's voice echoed in my head. "You don't have Ethan and Sophie to provide for anymore." My stomach twisted. No, that money wasn't extra. It wasn't available. It wasn't freedom. It was the future Ethan had planned for people who no longer existed to receive it. The college fund Sophie would never use. The retirement Ethan would never enjoy. Dreams converted into numbers. It wasn't luck. It was loss. And my family, if they discovered it, would smell opportunity. The next morning, my mother called again. I let it ring. Then again. And again. Eventually, I answered. "Rebecca." "Mom, we've been talking." Of course they had. "We think 50,000 is reasonable." "We." "Your father, Vanessa Daniel." I smiled bitterly. "The committee." "You think." "We know you've received insurance money." My blood ran cold. I stood perfectly still. "Excuse me." "People talk." No. Someone had told them. Someone at church. Someone at the hospital. Someone who believed families supported each other. "We don't know the amount," my mother continued. "But surely helping your sister isn't too much to ask." I stared through the bookstore window. Outside, snow drifted softly onto Main Street. "You really want to do this?" "What does that mean?" "You want to ask me for money that exists because Ethan died." "It's not Ethan's money anymore." I closed my eyes. It took every ounce of strength not to scream. Instead, I asked quietly, "If Sophie had lived, would you still be asking?" Silence. Then, "That's different." "Why?" "Because." She never finished. Because there wasn't an answer. Because the truth sounded ugly when spoken aloud. Because somewhere deep inside, even she understood. That afternoon, Vanessa arrived at the bookstore. Unannounced. She looked immaculate. Designer coat. Perfect makeup. Expensive handbag. The image of a woman holding her life together. She smiled nervously. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. She wandered between shelves. "Remember when we used to play library?" I remained behind the register. "You checked out books and charged me monopoly money." Still nothing. Finally, she sighed. "Rebecca, please." "What?" "We need help." "You've said that." "You don't understand." Then explain it. Her eyes filled unexpectedly. The bank is foreclosing. I blinked. The house. She nodded. The restaurant's gone. Daniel hadn't mentioned that part. The kids don't know yet. For a brief moment, my anger weakened. Because children were involved. Children who hadn't skipped funerals. Children who didn't deserve consequences created by adults. Vanessa saw hesitation and stepped closer. You've always helped me. I looked at her. Really looked at her. My little sister. The girl who used to braid my hair. Who borrowed my clothes. Who cried when boys broke her heart. You missed Sophie's funeral. Her face fell. I know. You posted selfies from Greece. We didn't know what to do. You came home and asked for money. Tears slid down her cheeks. We're desperate. I believed her. I truly did. Desperation looked different from entitlement. And for the first time, I saw both. Fear and selfishness. Mixed together. I can't save everyone, Vanessa. You don't have to. Then, what exactly are you asking me to save? She opened her mouth. Closed it again. Finally, she whispered, my life. I looked toward Sophie's reading corner. The tiny beanbag chair still covered in stars. My life ended 3 months ago. Vanessa started crying. Real tears. Messy tears. But even then, she never said the words I kept waiting to hear. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Ethan. I'm sorry about Sophie. I'm sorry we weren't there. Not once. After she left, I unlocked the bookstore office, closed the door, and pulled Ethan's list from my bag. Build something that lasts longer than us. The Sophie Hayes reading project. I traced the words with my fingertips. Outside, customers browsed quietly. Children laughed near the picture books. Life moved forward, whether I wanted it to or not. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the insurance money. Not rescue people who abandoned me. Not fix problems they created. Not buy approval. I wanted to build something. Something with Sophie's name on it. Something Ethan would have been proud of. Something that would outlive all of us. And if my family didn't like that choice, they were about to discover something they'd never seen before. Rebecca Hayes. Finally choosing herself. The stage they built for me. People think betrayal happens all at once. It doesn't. Usually, it happens in layers. A comment you excuse. A disappointment you minimize. A boundary you allow someone to cross because they're family. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've spent years teaching people exactly how poorly they can treat you. And they'll continue doing it. For as long as you let them. 3 weeks after Vanessa visited the bookstore, my cousin, Megan, called me. You busy? I just finished inventory. There was a pause. You should probably sit down. I leaned against the office desk. What happened? They're planning something. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Who? Aunt Linda's birthday party. I frowned. What does that have to do with me? Another pause. They're going to ask you for the money. I went completely still. What? In front of everyone. The silence stretched. Then Megan sighed. I wasn't supposed to hear it. Tell me. They think if the whole family is there, you'll cave. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. Because public pressure had always worked before. Growing up, I had been the peacemaker. The fixer. The daughter who apologized first. The sister who sacrificed. The one who gave in, because keeping everyone happy mattered more than being right. My mother knew it. Vanessa knew it. Daniel knew it. They were counting on the old Rebecca showing up. Megan's voice softened. You don't have to go. I looked through the office window. A little girl sat cross-legged in the children's section, reading a book about dinosaurs. You think I should skip it? Honestly. Yeah. I think they're setting a trap. I exhaled slowly. Maybe they were. But traps worked both ways. They want witnesses, I said quietly. What? They're building an audience. Rebecca. I opened Ethan's letter. The folded paper lived inside my purse now. I carried it everywhere. If the day ever comes when you have to choose between protecting yourself and keeping peace, choose yourself. I think I'm going. Megan groaned. Please tell me you're not planning to fight them. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. Ethan holding Sophie on his shoulders. Both of them laughing. No, I said. I'm planning to tell the truth. The party took place at the church fellowship hall. The same church where Ethan and Sophie had been buried. Walking through those doors again nearly stopped me. The smell of coffee. The polished floors. The folding tables covered with white cloths. The sound of relatives chatting. 40 people. Maybe more. People I'd grown up with. People who'd attended school plays. Graduations. Christmas dinners. Some smiled when they saw me. Others looked uncomfortable. Like they weren't sure which version of the story to believe. Poor Rebecca. Selfish Rebecca. Heartbroken Rebecca. Cold Rebecca. I suspected they'd heard all of them. Aunt Linda hugged me tightly. I'm glad you came. Happy birthday. You look tired. I smiled faintly. I am. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry about Ethan and Sophie. The simple sincerity nearly broke me. Thank you. 2 words. 2 honest words. Still more than I'd received from my immediate family. I spotted them near the dessert table. Mom. Dad. Vanessa. Daniel. They saw me immediately. Mom's face brightened. Relief. Triumph. Like a chess player watching an opponent willingly sit at the board. You came, she said. I was invited. She hugged me. I didn't hug back. You look thin. I've been grieving. Her smile tightened. Vanessa kissed my cheek. Daniel avoided eye contact. Interesting. Maybe shame had finally introduced itself. Or maybe he simply disliked confrontation. Either way. I noticed. Dinner passed uneventfully. Small talk. Birthday speeches. Children running between tables. I almost started to believe Megan had misunderstood. Maybe they'd reconsidered. Maybe. My father stood. He tapped his fork against a glass. The room quieted. And suddenly, I knew. He smiled warmly. I'd like to say a few words. Of course. He thanked everyone for coming. Spoke about family traditions. Commitment. Supporting one another. 40 years of memories. Then, his eyes found mine. Family takes care of family. A murmur of agreement moved through the room. He nodded thoughtfully. And sometimes, his voice lowered. People forget that. I heard Vanessa inhale sharply. Daniel stared at his plate. Mom folded her hands. My father continued. We've always helped our children. He looked directly at me. Especially Rebecca. The room shifted. People glanced my way. We supported her bookstore when nobody else believed in it. His expression saddened. And now, there it was. Our family is facing hardship. He sighed heavily. Daniel and Vanessa need help. Silence. 40 pairs of eyes. Watching. Waiting. And despite having the means, he said softly, Rebecca has refused. The room froze. I could practically hear hearts beating. There it is. The trap. I noticed Mom's carefully arranged expression. Disappointment. Hurt. Vanessa looked close to tears. Daniel stared at the floor. Victims. All of them. The script had been rehearsed beautifully. Then my father delivered the final line. We're not angry. He looked at me sadly. Just disappointed. I almost laughed. Because if you'd told me 6 months earlier that this moment would happen, I would have folded. Apologized. Written the check. Taken responsibility for everyone's comfort. But grief changes you. It burns away everything unnecessary, including the need to be liked. I stood up. No trembling. No raised voice. Just calm. I'd like to say something. The room turned toward me. My father nodded graciously. Certain he'd already won. Of course. I looked around the fellowship hall. At cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, people who had watched me grow up. I have 2 questions. Nobody moved. I took a breath. The first one is simple. I looked directly at my parents. How many of you attended Ethan and Sophie's funeral? Silence. A few hands shifted awkwardly. Several people slowly raised them. I nodded. Thank you. Then I asked, how many of you knew my parents, Vanessa, and Daniel were on a Mediterranean cruise during that funeral? The room went dead quiet. My mother's face lost color. What? Someone whispered. I heard Aunt Carol gasp. They weren't there. I turned toward my father. You told everyone I shut you out. He opened his mouth. Rebecca, you told people I wanted privacy. Now hold on. You told people I never invited you. Vanessa looked horrified. Mom whispered. Rebecca. I met her eyes. You skipped my husband and daughter's funeral. Nobody breathed. I continued softly. You chose a vacation. The silence became unbearable. A cousin frowned. Is that true? No answer. I looked around the room. 5 days after I buried Ethan and Sophie. My voice remained steady. My mother called asking for $50,000. Gasps. Shock. Disbelief. No, Mom said quickly. It wasn't like that. I looked at her. Then tell them what it was like. She couldn't. Because truth has a stubborn habit of refusing to cooperate with lies. Daniel stood abruptly. Rebecca, stop. I turned toward him. You told me Ethan would have helped. His face flushed. You've twisted everything. You called me selfish. Vanessa started crying. We were desperate. You never apologized. Her tears stopped. What? Not once. The room remained perfectly still. I looked at my sister. You never said Sophie's name. Vanessa's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing came out. I looked at my mother. You told me life goes on. Tears filled her eyes. Rebecca, you said I didn't have Ethan and Sophie to provide for anymore. Someone dropped a fork. The sound echoed through the hall. No, Mom whispered. I didn't mean it that way. Then how did you mean it? She couldn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. Only truth. Ugly. Uncomfortable. Undeniable. I looked around one final time. At 40 witnesses. I won't give you $50,000. My voice remained gentle. Not because I'm cruel. I glanced toward Vanessa. I genuinely hope you figure things out. Toward Daniel. I hope your children are okay. Toward my parents. I hope someday you understand what you lost. Then I picked up my purse. But I spent too many years sacrificing pieces of myself to keep everyone else comfortable. I touched Ethan's letter inside the bag. I won't do it anymore. Nobody moved. Nobody stopped me. As I turned toward the exit, I heard Aunt Carol speak quietly from the back. Did they really miss Sophie's funeral? Another voice answered. I was there. Megan stood. They weren't. The room shifted. Slowly. Then all at once. Like an avalanche finally breaking loose. And as I stepped into the cold evening air, I realized something extraordinary. For the first time in my life, I hadn't chosen peace at the expense of myself. I'd chosen truth. And somehow, that felt exactly like freedom. The things we choose to build. The parking lot was cold. Sharp November air filled my lungs as the church doors closed behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, hands buried in my coat pockets, heart beating steadily, waiting for guilt, for panic, for the familiar instinct to run back inside and apologize, to smooth things over, to make everyone comfortable again. But none of that came. Instead, I felt tired, a deep exhaustion that settled into my bones. And beneath it, something unfamiliar. Peace. For the first time in my life, I had told the truth without shrinking it. And I had survived. I climbed into my car. The driver's seat still held a tiny stain from the hot chocolate Sophie had spilled the previous winter. She'd cried, certain she'd ruined everything. Ethan had laughed. It's a car, kiddo. Then he'd looked at me and whispered loudly enough for Sophie to hear. Now, if she'd spilled this on your first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, we'd have a real crisis. Sophie had gasped. Dad. I smiled through tears. Then drove home. The calls started the next morning. Aunt Carol, Uncle Pete, Cousin Melissa. People who'd believed the story they'd been told. People who genuinely hadn't known. I'm sorry. We had no idea. Your mother said something completely different. You should have told us. That last one made me laugh softly. How exactly was I supposed to announce? Hello, everyone. Just a reminder that my family skipped my husband and daughter's funeral to drink cocktails in Italy. No. I hadn't wanted witnesses. I had wanted dignity. There was a difference. I accepted the apologies I believed. Ignored the ones that sounded more curious than compassionate. And moved on. Because revenge wasn't what I wanted. I wanted peace. And peace sometimes looks like closing the door quietly. The only person who didn't call was my mother. For almost 2 weeks. No texts. No voicemails. Nothing. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, she walked into Moonlight Pages. I looked up from unpacking new releases. She looked older. Smaller. As though the confrontation had finally caught up to her. Can we talk? I studied her face. The woman who taught me to tie my shoes. Who packed school lunches. Who forgot to show up when I needed her most. 5 minutes. She nodded. We moved into my office. She sat across from me. Hands folded tightly in her lap. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally, she whispered, I didn't think you'd tell everyone. I stared at her. That was it. Not to. I'm sorry. Not to. I was wrong. Just surprised that consequences had arrived. You skipped Sophie's funeral. Her eyes filled. We'd already paid for the trip. I closed mine briefly. Mom, we thought there would be time later. Later. That dangerous word again. Later. We thought we'd make it up to you. I looked at her, You can't make up for missing a funeral. Silence. We didn't know what to do. You show up. Tears slip down her cheeks. I failed you. There it was. Not enough. Too late. But true. I failed Sophie. I swallowed hard. Yes. Her shoulders shook. I don't expect forgiveness. I didn't answer. Because forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. And grief had taught me not to promise what I couldn't give. Eventually, she stood. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I believed she meant it. I also knew it didn't change anything. She left. And I didn't stop her. December arrived quietly. Snow-covered Cedar Ridge. Moonlight Pages hosted holiday readings. Children bundled in scarves crowded onto bean bags. Parents drank cocoa. Laughter filled the shop again. Different laughter. But laughter all the same. One evening, I pulled Ethan's list from my purse. Things we haven't done yet. See the northern lights. Visit Ireland. Retire near water. Expand Moonlight Pages. Build something that lasts longer than us. The Sophie Hayes Reading Project. I stared at those words. Then opened my laptop. And started working. The Sophie Hayes Reading Project officially launched 3 months later. It began small. 1 bookshelf. 1 elementary school. 100 donated books. We painted stars across every reading corner. Each child received a free book to keep. Inside, every cover sat a sticker. This book was shared in memory of Sophie Hayes. For children who dream big. Read bravely. And believe in impossible things. I cried the first time I saw one. Not because it hurt. Because it mattered. Then local newspapers noticed. Then neighboring schools called. Then libraries. Community centers. Foster programs. Children's hospitals. Could we help them too? I used part of Ethan's insurance money. Then bookstore profits. Then donations arrived. Teachers volunteered. Retirees organized drives. Teenagers painted murals. 1 bookshelf became 5. Then 15. Then 30. Within 2 years, the Sophie Hayes Reading Project had donated over 20,000 books. 20,000 chances. 20,000 stories. 20,000 reminders that love doesn't end simply because someone dies. Sometimes, it changes shape. One spring afternoon, a little girl approached me during a school event. She couldn't have been older than 8. She held a copy of A Wrinkle in Time against her chest. Are you Sophie's mom? I smiled. I am. Did she really love space? Very much. The little girl grinned. I want to be an astronaut too. I looked up toward the mural above the reading corner. Painted stars. Planets. Rocket ships. And in tiny silver letters. Dream bigger than fear. Tears filled my eyes. Sophie would have liked that. The girl nodded seriously. Then whispered, I think she'd be happy. Maybe. I hoped so. Years passed. The sharpness of grief softened. Not disappeared. Never disappeared. Some mornings, I still reached for Ethan beside me. Sometimes, I caught myself buying Sophie's favorite cereal. Loss doesn't vanish. You simply learn how to carry it differently. Moonlight Pages expanded. The reading project grew. Life continued. Not because I wanted it to. Because that's what life does. I moved Sophie's star-covered rain boots eventually. Not into storage. Not into a box. Onto a shelf behind my office desk. Where I could see them every day. Where children often pointed. Whose boots are those? I always smiled. They belonged to a little girl who loved books and outer space. What happened to her? I looked toward the bookshelves, at children laughing, reading, dreaming. She changed a lot of lives. And somehow, that answer became enough. I never gave Vanessa the $50,000. Daniel's financial troubles forced them to downsize. They sold the big house, started over. Years later, Vanessa finally apologized. A real apology. Without excuses. Without requests. We aren't as close as we once were. But we're trying. Slowly. Carefully. One honest conversation at a time. As for my father, he never truly understood. Some people protect their pride more fiercely than their relationships. And eventually, you stop trying to teach them what love requires. You simply accept who they are and build your life accordingly. Last spring, I drove to the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge at sunrise. I brought coffee. One regular. One black. Out of habit. I sat there watching morning light spill across the mountains. Then unfolded Ethan's list. Most of the items remained unfinished. Ireland. Northern Lights. Waterfront retirement. But one line. I crossed out. Build something that lasts longer than us. Done. I smiled through tears. Then added another. In my own handwriting. Keep choosing joy. Because grief teaches you that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. But love leaves evidence. In books. In kindness. In people who show up. In little girls dreaming about stars. In rain boots sitting on shelves. In ordinary moments that become sacred because they existed at all. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by presence. By who sits beside you in hospital waiting rooms. Who stands in the front pew. Who answers the phone and says, I'm coming. And if someone repeatedly asks you to sacrifice yourself to earn their love, remember this. Love that must be purchased isn't love. You don't owe people access to your life simply because they share your last name. Choose the people who choose you. Build what matters. Say the words while you still can. And if life gives you the chance, leave something beautiful behind. Even if it's just a bookshelf full of stories. And a little girl's dream reaching toward the stars. That's my story. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.